Hi guys, this is a slideshow about European exploration. What you should do as students is watch my slideshow, listen to my voice, and take notes. If at any time I start speaking too fast or you need to slow down, push the pause button, take the notes that you need to take, and then push play again. What you should have at the end of it all is probably a good page of notes, or at least your PowerPoint packet that I hand out to you filled out. So, here goes. European exploration. What we had is 1,000 years, called the Middle Ages, in Europe, where not much progress was made. And then, as we learned the other day, in Italy, slowly but surely, people started to essentially come alive again. There was a rebirth, and that's what the Renaissance means, a rebirth. People started learning more about education, philosophy, art, music, poetry, government. They started caring about those things again, education, science. And then there was an awakening in Europe once that came around, and feudalism was dead once again. So around 1300, people began to start to wonder what else is out there. So that's when places like Portugal and Spain and France started building large ships so that they could take advantage of certain things like trade in the East. Spices were very expensive. So they wanted to make sure that they could get as much of that as they could and make money from it. So that's when they started to wonder, where else can we go in this world? And they started to think about exploring. There were three basic reasons why people wanted to go elsewhere and explore, and they're very simple. Think of the three G's: God, gold, and glory. In other words, there were religious reasons for going out there into the world and exploring. There were monetary reasons for going out there and exploring. And of course, people wanted to make sure that everybody knew that their country was the greatest, and that's why they went out there. Let's talk about God first. Even though the Renaissance was a time when people started moving away from the church, and especially when considering how much the church was in control of Europe during the Renaissance, or excuse me, during the Middle Ages, it still was a major factor in Europe. They wanted to spread Christianity to the rest of the world. They found out that places like Africa and the East did not have Christianity, so a lot of people wanted to make sure that they were able to spread their Christianity to other nations, not just Europe. They felt it was their duty to do so. Um, so that's when people started going to places like the Americas and Africa, and people like religious people like priests and monks of the Catholic Church were spread around the world to try to bring Christianity. One of the biggest examples is Mexico. Before that, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayas were all pagan religions. They believed in many gods. Afterwards, Spanish conquistadors went to Mexico and spread Christianity, Catholicism, the Catholic faith throughout Mexico. To this day, 80% of all Mexicans are Catholic in religion. Now let's talk about gold. Obviously, one of the biggest factors in doing anything yesterday, today, tomorrow will be to make money. People started to realize in the Renaissance that they didn't have to be necessarily poor or rich. The middle class started to emerge. The middle class were people that had trade, people that could make things, people that could trade things, people that could sell things, people that could build things. They had a large amount of wealth if they could get out there into the world. There were things out in Asia like spices. There were things in Mexico like gold. According to the explorers that went to Mexico, apparently you could literally pick gold up off the ground and get as much of it as you wanted. It was just there for the taking. So people began to realize that if they could get a ship going and they could get out there into the world, they could find a lot of ways to make money. Then they could expand their trade networks. So, for instance, Portugal, if they could get out there and trade with the East and get most of the spices, well, then they could force people in Europe to pay what they wanted for those spices, and they could make a lot of money doing it. Finally, there was glory. The reason I have a crown here is because it represents the king and queen of certain countries. When you visit an area, when you first explore an area, like let's say the Americas, what you can do is you can conquer the people in that area and you can claim that area as your own. It can become a colony. In other words, it is controlled by your country. So let's take Mexico for instance again. Spain was able to take Mexico, claim it, and then of course they could bring back all the gold they wanted, spices they wanted, and control a lot of the trade, including the slave trade back and forth. Then they didn't have to pay for those resources, so they never had to pay the people that lived in Mexico already for any gold. They could just go, take it, bring it back, and that made their country and their king and queen very rich, and they also had more land throughout the world. And whoever had the most land, of course, had the most power. So that was a very big factor in exploration. So you got God, you got gold, you got glory. Those are the three main reasons you need to know about for doing the exploration of the world. Okay, the other question is why now? In other words, why didn't the exploration of the world happen before this? Why after the Renaissance? Why during this time in history? The answer is simple. They simply couldn't do it. They didn't have the technology in Europe to explore the world. There were three things in particular that really made it possible: the caravel, the astrolabe, and the compass. First and foremost, it was the caravel. Caravel is another word for the ship. So think about the ships you see in all the pirate movies and things like that. It looked like that. Before that, there wasn't a ship that was really made to go out into the open ocean like the Atlantic or the Pacific and handle some of that weather that they had. They needed something that was sturdy enough to go that far for that long, particularly because it takes months to get across the ocean. So therefore, you have to have a big enough ship to be able to haul enough food and cargo so that you can survive for that time out on the water. The caravel had triangular sails. It made it possible for it to sail against the wind. It also had an improved rudder, which is the steering device underneath the boat. It allowed it to turn more easily. If you go across the ocean and the wind is not behind you, you have to find a way to sail against the wind, and this ship made it possible to do that. It finally had a large cargo area. It made it able to carry lots of supplies needed for a long voyage. You gotta eat when you're out there on the ocean. Here's some examples of caravels. A lot of them look very similar. Large cargo area in the back, right in here. This is where people slept. This is where food was stored. And then, of course, the triangular sails. Some had a lot of sails, some had a few sails, but they all looked very similar. The next thing that made it possible was the astrolabe. Astrolabe was a tool used to determine how far north or south of the equator you were. It was perfected by the Islamic Empire. So the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration gave a chance for people to interact with the Islamic Empire, and they learned that you could actually know where you are when you're out there on the ocean. For anybody who's been out on open water on a boat before, it's very easy to get out of sight of land. And when you're out of sight of land for a long time, how do you find out where you are, how far away you are from land? Well, the astrolabe gave people the opportunity to know where they were on the earth so that they didn't panic, and then they knew how much more trip they had, and of course they could stay close to the equator, which gave them an idea of how far north or south they had drifted. Finally, the compass was invented. The compasses that we know now are more like GPSs, but back then basically it was a device that pointed north. So explorers on ships once again could accurately track which direction they were heading and how also where north was. If you know where north was, well then you know where you're going, east, west, or south. Alright, so let's think about it for a second, guys. In what ways did Renaissance Europe benefit from interaction with other societies? Did this interaction lead to progress? All these inventions that we talk about, they didn't necessarily come from Europe itself. Even though Europe experienced the Renaissance and people started learning more and building more and designing more, it doesn't just come from nothing. Where do you think the compass, the astrolabe, and the caravel all came from? Their ideas. Other people and other civilizations had these things first. And then they came to Europe through trade, through interaction, through the Crusades. That's how people learned about these things. So, in what ways did Renaissance Europe benefit from interaction with other societies? And did this interaction lead to progress? Can you think of progress made by this interaction? All right, that's it for now. Hopefully, you got a page of notes and you were able to fill out your PowerPoint handout. Any questions? Let me know. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.